What if you saw the US president board Air Force One, but he wasn't actually on the plane when it took off? This is exactly what happened to Donald Trump after the NATO summit in Ankara on July 8. Trump secretly left the presidential aircraft using an airport catering truck and boarded a much smaller US military jet. Why? Because US security officials believed there could be a threat from Iran, and the entire operation was designed to keep Trump's real location a secret. So how did this elaborate plane switch happen? Let's break it down. Trump had arrived in Turkey on board a Boeing 747-8 aircraft that had been donated by Qatar and modified for presidential use. But when it was time to leave Ankara, Trump first appeared to board the older Air Force One. Cameras captured him getting onto the aircraft. Journalists and some White House staff also believed Trump was going to fly on that plane. But that was part of the whole plan. Once Trump was inside the aircraft, a catering truck was brought up to the opposite side of the plane. Trump then reportedly exited Air Force One through that side and entered the elevated catering vehicle. The truck drove away from the presidential aircraft and took Trump to another part of the airport. There he boarded a much smaller military aircraft. To be specific, a Boeing C-32A. The C-32A is essentially a military version of the Boeing 757. It is much smaller than the huge Boeing 747 normally associated with the US president. It is also commonly used to transport senior US officials, including the vice president and cabinet officials. So why use a smaller aircraft? Because in a situation where the president's location needs to be concealed, a smaller military aircraft can provide another option and can be used to make president's movements less predictable. Now there's an important detail here. Air Force One is not actually the name of one specific aircraft. It is the call sign used by any aircraft carrying the US president. The aircraft most people recognize as Air Force One is the VC-25A, a highly modified Boeing 747-200B. Trump normally travels on one of these presidential Boeing 747s. These aircrafts are specifically equipped with secure communications, medical facilities, offices, and extensive defense and security systems. But on this occasion, the aircraft everyone thought Trump was traveling on became part of the deception. The old Air Force One continued with journalists and members of the White House team while Trump traveled separately aboard the C-32A. And then there is the other aircraft that made the headlines, the Boeing 747-8 donated by Qatar. Trump had used this newer aircraft during his trip. The plane is significantly newer than the current VC-25A fleet and has been modified for presidential operations. But despite using it in Turkey, Trump did not simply board that aircraft and fly straight back to the United States. Instead, according to reports, the security team arranged a secret switch. Trump eventually transferred to the Qatari donated aircraft during the journey back to the US. The older Air Force One was also used as part of the deception. Now comes the biggest question. Was Iran actually planning to attack Trump? US officials have not publicly disclosed the precise intelligence behind the operation. But reports say that the Secret Service had information about a possible Iranian threat. Trump himself confirmed that the security officials told him to change the aircraft. He said he was simply following instructions from the Secret Service and the military. Trump has also previously described himself as a top Iranian target.
Not surprised. I have a lot of threats. I have a lot of threats that you don't know about. Any consequential president has a lot of threats. Non-consequential presidents don't get threatened. And I think that I'm maybe the most consequential president. There's nobody who's done more than me in a period of almost 6 years. There's nobody.
And remember, this happened amid extremely high tensions between Washington and Tehran, including renewed US military strikes against Iran. So the plane switch was not simply about comfort, luxury, or which aircraft Trump preferred. It was a security precaution based on a perceived threat. The most unusual part was the deception. Trump's location was deliberately concealed even from some people traveling with him. The idea was simple. If an adversary does not know which aircraft is carrying the president, it becomes harder to target him. The decoy aircraft creates uncertainty, and this appears to have been the logic behind the Ankara operation. But it has also raised another question. If journalists and staffs were unknowingly left aboard the decoy aircraft, were they also placed at risk? Trump himself later said that the aircraft he actually boarded could have potentially been at greater risk because an adversary might have been more likely to target that. So in simple terms, this was not just a plane change. Trump boarded the old Air Force One in front of the cameras. He then secretly exited through the other side using a catering truck. He was taken to a smaller C-32A military aircraft. He flew separately while the decoy aircraft continued its journey. and later he transferred to the newer Boeing 747-8 donated by Qatar for the journey back to the United States. The operation remained secret for weeks until the details of Trump's unusual flight out of Turkey were finally reported this week. And this is how a catering truck, a military jet, and a presidential aircraft became part of one of the most unusual security operations involving a US president in recent years.